Shana Tova. Boy, what an honor it is to be here today. I'm grateful to Rabbi Navarez for the invitation to teach from this pulpit, which I sorely miss. It's a blessing to be here with my colleagues, Rabbi Cantor Bernstein, Rabbi Gimbel, an added spiritual gift to pray once again with the great musicians and singers of Beth Israel. Wow, it's been quite a time, hasn't it? A lot has happened in our world since I retired. Just in the nick of time. Insurrections, impeachments, alarming Supreme Court decisions, fluttering economy, war. It's a long list, but the upheaval, the biggest upheaval of all, has been the pandemic. The pandemic has posed some pretty challenging questions. It may or may not be over, judging from the number of masks in the room. I don't know. But these questions loom. And for me, the first and maybe the most important question cuts right to the heart of faith. Is God behind this pandemic? What role does God play in our suffering? An answer to these questions can be found in one of the most disturbing stories in all of Scriptures. The last chapter of the second book of Samuel tells a frightful tale and a shocking portrayal of God. In this story, God appears to be evil. The story begins with a shocker. And the anger of the Lord again flared up against Israel. God's mad at the Jews again. We don't know what the previous time was. And we don't know what made God mad again. Even Rashi, the great biblical commentator, remarks starkly, I don't know what it is they did. God is angry and incites King David against Israel. How? God told David, go, number Israel and Judah. The Torah says taking a census of the people is fraught with peril. You avoid taking a census of the Israelites so that, and I quote, no plague may come upon them. But David can't help himself. He's so happy to be in conversation with God. Wouldn't you be? And so he agrees to do something that he knows is dangerous. One of his most trusted counselors, Joab, advises him against the census. But David insists, and the census is conducted. Immediately upon its conclusion, David realizes he's done something terrible. He confesses to God that he's committed a great sin and wishes to be absolved of his guilt. God sends the court prophet, Gad, G-A-D, to tell David he has 3 punishments to choose from. 7 years of famine, military defeat, or 3 days of pestilence. David is sure of one thing. He doesn't want to fall into the hands of his enemies. He doesn't trust other people. But he trusts God. So he picks pestilence, figuring that unlike people, in his own words, God's mercy is great. And then, 70,000 men, women, and children die. That's God's mercy? With the plague raging, an angel is about to destroy Jerusalem when God stops the angel. At this moment, God regrets what he's done. And one verse later, David also repented. I have sinned, he tells God. The people have done nothing to deserve this plague. Just punish me. And so the prophet God comes again and tells David to purchase the threshing floor on a hill above the city of David and offer a sacrifice to God there. David does as he's told, and immediately the plague stops. I told you this was a disturbing story. There is no running away from it. God is behind the pandemic. Why? We don't know. We can't understand God. God's anger isn't explained. This is not a moral, rational God. The only thing that's clear in this story is that God started the pandemic. Our minds think in terms of morality and reason, but these are human constructs. Our minds cannot comprehend God. There is an aspect to God that Viktor Frankl referred to as numinous. This is the mystery of God, that aspect of God that is beyond morality and reason, out of reach of our minds. While we cannot understand God, we can seek meaning in our experiences, even our suffering. In Frankl's seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, where he discusses this numinous aspect of God, he developed his famous theory that prisoners in Nazi concentration camps who were able to find some meaning, some purpose to their suffering inside those camps, those were the inmates that had the greatest likelihood of survival. Frankl taught that when we suffer, the question shouldn't be, why is God doing this to me? But rather, how can I give my suffering some meaning? Look at the end of our story. With his sacrifice on that hilltop, David found a solution to a problem that he had ever since he made Jerusalem his capital. Jerusalem was a brilliant political choice because it belonged to no tribe and was loyal only to him. But the city had no importance to an Israelite nation. When David's sacrifice stopped the plague, he realized that that very spot, would be a great place to build a house for God. He immediately ordered the Ark of the Covenant to be brought to Jerusalem. Bringing the Ark and making a home for God on the spot that his sacrifice miraculously stopped the plague would make Jerusalem not only an important political city, but it would also become a city that would be sacred to all of Israel. And so, the holiness of Jerusalem, with which we are so familiar, the holiness of that city was a result of a pandemic God caused. The end of that suffering was the establishment of the sanctity of Jerusalem throughout history for every person who believes in one God. Our pandemic has been horrible. The greatness of our humanity is revealed in the minds with which we've been endowed to help us understand how it came to be and how to treat it. Maybe it originated in those horrible and horribly named wet markets in China. Maybe it was an accident in a lab. We can use our minds to figure this out, but we can't bring God into that discussion. The Torah reading for this morning begins to hint at this. When we read our Torah portion's poetic description of the creation of everything, we are in awe. What a universe the Blessed Holy One has made. Who could imagine the horrors locked up in nature, like cancer or the coronavirus? Throughout history, people have tried to unlock these mysteries. In his life, Moses asked God for two things: to behold God's essence and to understand God's ways. The first is a theology question. The second is a physics question. God answers the first question with a firm no. You cannot know God. You cannot go God that way. You can't break the boundary between God and humanity. You cannot see my face. God says you cannot capture my essence. You have limits. Don't even touch the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve are warned. But the answer to the second question is yes. I will teach you everything about the world, how everything is connected. The creation story culminates with a charge to humanity: use your minds to learn everything about the world and conquer it. So we can develop a vaccine for the coronavirus in a matter of months, but we cannot understand why God would let loose a pandemic to ravish the earth. Once before in my lifetime, I tried to find meaning in my suffering. In the aftermath of the death of our infant Daniel, who lived only 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, my father-in-law, may he rest in peace, went to the hospital and stood outside the neonatal intensive care unit, looking through binoculars at the grandson that he would never be able to hold. From him, I learned the power of love. I learned to appreciate medical workers, from the pediatric cardiologist, and if you ask me, there shouldn't be the need for such a thing. The pediatric cardiologist taking care of our boy stopped in to see him at 3 a.m. and stayed for 3 hours trying to understand how his little heart was working. Any knowledge that he gained would not help him or us. But it was a product of his birth defect. And I learned about the power of prayer and community from the comfort we received during the 3 Sabbaths of Daniel's life, when prayers for him and us were offered in congregations throughout Los Angeles by our colleagues. A baby born with a heart not fit to sustain life? How could God create such a child? I'll never know. But I do know how much love, concern, and support resulted from the suffering we experienced. During this pandemic, we've heard inspiring stories of people who discovered meaning and purpose at this horrible time. Physicians who had retired came out of retirement to help when the virus was raging. People acquired or made masks and brought them to hospitals for healthcare workers when supplies were running out. Young people realized that a senior citizen living near them needed help getting groceries and volunteered to help. Medical folks right here in San Diego, I know at least one member of our synagogue, at the height of the pandemic, volunteered to go cross the border into Mexico and relieve some of the suffering there. My prayer for the world is that we will have learned during this pandemic that every human life is a lot more valuable than borders and building and statues, that we will become less destructive of the environment, that we will realize how inextricably tied we are to one another, how our lives are entwined, and how much we depend on each other. I pray that we will be kinder and gentler and more respectful towards those around us. And my prayer for you on this New Year day is that you suffer little in life. But when you do meet painful challenges, I pray that your faith will remain firm and you will be able to find some meaning that will feed hope that you can make it through to the other end of whatever challenges life throws your way. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.